everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I'm your host, Taylor Rockwell. Daryl Grove is not with me. He is instead in Boston. You will be hearing from him about halfway through the show. We talk some ads, we do a little Bundesliga quiz, and we get an update on his health because he's up in Boston for some treatment, but I'll let him explain that. But since Daryl is not here, I am instead talking to Matt Hermann of the Talking Fussball podcast. My German is not as good as his. That should be obvious. Matt has so much knowledge about the Bundesliga. It's kind of absurd. I gave him like very general preparation for this, and he answered every single question with all the knowledge you would expect of a person who apparently has an encyclopedic knowledge of the Bundesliga. So much so that initially this was just going to be like a kind of standard like 40-minute-ish preview of the league. Instead, it's going to be a two-parter. So this is part one. We talk about maybe some of like the title contenders and also some of the newly promoted teams with a few other more general topics in there. I think Tyler Adams is probably the only American we get to on this episode. Then on part two, which will be out tomorrow, it's a little bit more focused on some of the Americans in the Bundesliga as well as their clubs and the expectations for them. And then some of the kind of like the rest of the best in there, say your Leverkusens, your Gladbachs, your Wolfsburgs, all of those good squads. So part one today, part two tomorrow. And with that, I will turn it over to me and Matt, mostly Matt. With me now, I've got a man who I assume is wearing his full flamingo costume. It's Matt Hermann of the Talking Fussball podcast. Matt, hello. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm just wearing a plain red shirt, though,
okay.
So, you know.
No flamingo for you?
No. It's actually been a couple of weeks since I've been to a forward game, so I haven't been all flamingo clad in a little while. But I do have my Mingo gear.
All right, it's
for special occasions.
It's some solid gear. I like for special occasions. I assume weddings and like black tie events. That's when you wear your Mingo gear.
Exactly.
You've helped me understand a thing there. So, do they go by forward? Would you say I'm a forward fan and not a like Madison fan?
Oh yeah, for sure. Forward is like if you were to break it down to just one word.
All right, there we go. I've learned new things, but we are not here to talk about USL League One, I promise. Instead, we're going to be talking about the Bundesliga, which kicks off this coming weekend. To do so, we're going to be talking to, as I said, Matt Hermann of the Talking Fussball podcast. Matt has been on many times before. I think there was one time when, like, I think Daryl turned it into a sort of like a quiz show. Daryl is not here, so I am grateful for that. But instead, I have lots of questions for you, Matt, about lots of different Bundesliga teams, as well as just some sort of general questions overall. So I hope you are ready to go with all of the much Bundesliga knowledge you have.
Oh, yeah, and I think, not having Daryl here this time is going to mean that I get off a little easier when it comes to pronunciation teaching.
Yeah, that's what it was.
We
that's
got
right.
real
Yeah.
in the weeds there.
We did, and I'm glad we won't have to do that, although I shall do my best. Although, actually, let's go here to start. Is it Bayern Munich or is it Bayern München?
Oh, so certainly the official name of the club is Bayern München.
Right.
And, they have attempted, it seems, to, use the original name of the city, München, as opposed to Munich, in their sort of official club communications. And certainly they're like, Twitter feeds for Spanish and, USA, English, whatever. They try to use Bayern München instead of Munich. But I don't think they get too worked up about it. They're not,
I feel like
they're not like that.
I feel like most of the German Bayern supporting fans I've met refer to them as Bayern more than anything else. But I guess that's my question is if I went there and said I'm going to the Bayern Munich game, would I get some looks? Would they know I was American aside from the accent?
Oh yeah, I think they would because people do say Bayern München, but very much in German people also just call them Bayern or even Die Bayern, which is sort of a way to sort of just get it out of your mouth as quickly as you can.
Well, Die Bayern have had a strange summer, I would say. They came out of the gates. They declared there's going to be big signings. And I guess there have been. Lucas Hernandez has come in from Atletico, Benjamin Pavard from Stuttgart, Jan Fiat Arp from Hamburg. But the one that I guess is kind of on the mind right now is that they went from Callum Hudson-Odoi to Leroy Sana to Leon Bailey. Now they've signed to Ivan Perisic today. All of that leads me to ask you, at this point, do you think Bayern have had a good summer in terms of the transfer window, or do you think they're going to need to make some more signings in order for it to be a successful window?
They've had a good transfer window in that they basically took care of one of their biggest needs that they had, which is to say they needed new blood in the defense. Last season, that was really, at least the first half of the season, I think that was what was holding them back more than anything was you know, just a degree of aging and like sort of dumb mistakes being made at the back. I mean, they were in a position at the end of the season where they needed to buy a couple of new guys, and I think that Pavard and Hernandez are both really good players who will probably get even better during their time at Bayern. But they also got to the point where it seemed like the club had decided they needed to sell either Boateng or Hummels, and I get the impression that during the course of last season, because Jerome Boateng was not super engaged for the first part of the season, it seemed, and it seemed like the club was actively feeling out teams about how much they would be willing to pay for Boateng. I mean, they basically had personal terms done with Paris Saint-Germain, but PSG just didn't want to put up the amount of money that Bayern wanted for him. And it seems to me that Bayern decided that if the market isn't there for Jerome Boateng, then we'll sell Hummels instead. I mean, it was weird that they sold him to Borussia Dortmund, which is of course their like biggest rival for the title. But I think that the buying they did in defense was good. Everything else has been a real puzzling situation because obviously Arjen Robben and Franck Ribéry needed to go. I mean, they basically were players who could hit the heights occasionally through the course of a season. They would spend each of them pretty significant periods on the sidelines, either as second choice or as hurt. And it shows a lot of faith that they have stuck by the idea that, Kingsley Coman and Serge Gnabry are going to get the job done on the wings and be their sort of featured wing attackers. But they don't have any depth behind those guys. And I would not be surprised at all if Bayern sort of tried to rectify things because they're looking really thin in a lot of places going forward. And their attacking buys this summer have been really pretty lackluster. I think Ivan Perisic is a perfectly fine player. I think he's going to be a really nice sort of, second option. But, they need to sort of impose their will a little bit on the league like they like to do. And I think that, a big name buy might help them do that.
Well, and I feel like a big name buy also helps them a little bit in terms of the locker room because, as you mentioned, Robin Ribéry gone, Rafinha gone, Mats Hummels also gone. Like, who do you think, as of now, is sort of the leader in that Bayern squad right now? Is it Manuel Neuer? Is it somebody who's been there, or is it somebody maybe a little bit younger who's coming through?
Oh no, I would say that Manuel Neuer, in terms of just personality, has a really big part to play. I think also Thomas Müller, as a guy who's been with that club his entire career, also has sort of a big say in things. Joshua Kimmich has sort of stepped up as someone who has been looking to take on a bigger leadership role. I mean, it's interesting that a lot of these guys happen to be players who are not playing at the center of the pitch, which is in a lot of times where you want to have your leaders. Thiago Alcantara is somebody who I don't think ever has, become a vocal guy. I don't know whether that's a language issue or whether it's a personality issue, but he always strikes me as being a little bit quiet on the pitch. Leon Goretzka maybe could grow into that role, and I think, as long as he gets games, could turn into more of a leader for this team. But there is a little bit of that missing, maybe.
So, as of this point, I'm assuming maybe they sign another player. But even if they don't, do you think this is compared to Bayern teams we've seen of the past, is this about as weak of a Bayern team as we've seen in recent memory?
Ooh, it depends on how recent you want to go back. Yeah. I mean, I would say at least for the last 10 years, they have had sort of far and away the best squad in the Bundesliga in any given season. I feel like last season was beginning to change, that Dortmund's squad was, at least in most areas of the pitch, measured up to Bayern's and now might even have surpassed it in terms of quality and depth. Because Bayern have a very, very thin squad, for one thing. I think they only have something like 17 or 18 outfield players in their squad, which, lets you know that they probably have a little bit of buying to do yet. I mean, it's funny because Bayern, like many sort of successful German teams, like to get their business done early and are sort of famous for doing that. I mean, that Hernandez and Pavard deals were done, well before the season even ended. But they seem to have just not quite pulled the trigger on a few deals that they were sort of considering, or maybe the fact that they have been linked with a lot of very expensive players this summer, whether that's, Leroy Sané, who almost came. I reckon if he hadn't gotten hurt in the Community Shield, he would have come. Or, Dybala, or they've been linked also with Gareth Bale or Philip Coutinho, which, may or may not happen depending on what happens with Neymar. I think Bayern is a club that has always been a little bit shy about big ticket items, let's just say. They like to buy, sort of elite Bundesliga players as opposed to necessarily elite European or elite global players. And that price range typically puts them well under what a lot of the other sort of super clubs in Europe pay, that's where they naturally want to be and where they have been for the last decade, with a little bit of a drop off maybe in the last couple of years. But they just don't like to spend 100 million euros on a player, and maybe they've just gotten a little shy when it comes to doing that. I still think they need to buy a player or two, and so does Robert Lewandowski. He can't stop talking about it.
Well, that's good of him to make that public. But like this, I guess like this kind of like interview is my goal to like do a season preview and answer some specific questions about some specific teams. But I also have some more like general ones about the Bundesliga, like example, the Munich München thing, which I know is probably a silly question, but it is one that I'm like, would I stand out? And this is another one that like when you say going back 10 years in terms of Bayern's strength, like I think back to like the Owen Hargreaves Bayern Munich team, and I remember in that era being like, oh yeah, like Bayern Munich, like they're still a good team, but they weren't quite at that level that they've been, under Van Gaal and Pep Guardiola. And I think back to like I think it was maybe when Frank Ribery signed for them, even it was a bit of a like, oh, he went there? Like that's interesting. And it feels like they do sort of have this sort of cyclical thing of like kind of like not even like fall away for a little bit, but like aren't front and center in terms of like the European Super League sort of teams, and then get very good and stay very good, and then they maybe plateau a little bit, they fall off a little bit, and then it almost like affords them the opportunity to sort of be forgotten about a little bit, and then they go out and sign these big players, as you said, these big Bundesliga players. Suddenly they're back on top for another like 6 years. That's kind of my understanding of Bayern Munich. I don't know if that's at all accurate, but that's at least where I'm operating from.
I mean, I think there is some truth to that. I mean, the absolute sort of utter dominance that they have had over the last 7 years, which, they've won the title every single year, that is quite anomalous in Bundesliga history. I mean, teams have won the title, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years in a row on a number of occasions, but winning it 7 years in a row was crazy. And, Bayern Munich, when I arrived in Germany, these many years ago, back in 2006. I mean, it was certainly, they were thought of as like by far the biggest and most successful team in Germany, but like there was no sense that they were absolutely untouchable, and there was definitely a sense that in any given year they could mess things up and blow it, lose the title. And I think that had something to do with them not necessarily understanding where, how close they were to being really, really dominant. I mean, I remember they were still sort of messing around with a lot of, just sort of above average players from other teams in the Bundesliga. They were buying up players, from Hanover and Hamburg and, Karlsruhe. I mean, players in some cases who turned out to be legends like Oliver Kahn or whatever. But in a lot of cases, they were buying up guys like Marcel Janssen or, I don't know, like Jan Schlaudraff, who had a good year at a sort of medium-sized club. And then Bayern would buy them and they would, either play them a little bit or not play them at all. And they just sort of messed around. Something happened in the late 2000s when Bayern were sort of not really getting their act together. And, they had 1 year where they finished, I think, third or fourth. They lost the title to, Stuttgart won the title in 2007. Wolfsburg won the title in 2009. And at a certain point in time, like Bayern were just like, okay, we're not screwing around anymore. We're going to actually go for the top shelf, or as close to it as we can get. And, guys like Frank Ribery came in, Luca Toni, who was a pretty big name buy at the time.
I forgot about Luca Toni at Bayern.
Yeah, seriously. And he had a couple of really, really good years. And he actually is the source of the famous Louis van Gaal. I'm going to show you guys my balls in the dressing room story. And Arjen Robben, of course, who had some good years at both Chelsea and Real Madrid, but hadn't quite caught on there. Bayern is where he actually hit the heights that he would eventually hit, where he became a sort of global superstar. It seems like Bayern have also benefited from an extremely good generation of German talent, like both coming from within their ranks and from other clubs. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time that within just a few years of each other, your own club produces a Philipp Lahm, a Bastian Schweinsteiger, a Thomas Müller, and buys, Jerome Boateng, Manuel Neuer. I mean, even Germany is not necessarily blessed with a generation that good. And it just so happened that because this was a time when Bayern was willing to sort of buy absolutely all the best talent it could from within Germany, they ended up with a spectacular team. And, maybe if Bayern don't make another deal this summer and don't win the title and maybe finish even third or fourth, if things go really badly this year, maybe they'll have to sort of pull the pin out and spend on some seriously expensive players if they want to get back to where they are now.
All right. Well, we'll see how much the spending happens. But if they do fall off, then it seems like it would be Borussia Dortmund's gain. That's where I wanted to move next. I mentioned earlier that, or I guess you mentioned earlier, Matt Hummels left Bayern, returned to Borussia Dortmund. Like, he's one of those players who I think just because he's been around in my mind for so long, I assume like, oh, that's a nice thing. Like, he goes back to Dortmund, he gets kind of a send-off, he gets one farewell season, and then I looked him up and he's 30 years old. And I think I had this idea that he's like very much past it, and now I'm realizing that it might not be the case. So I'm then wondering for you, like, how big of a signing do you think he's going to be for Dortmund? How much of a role will he play for them this year?
He will have a very big role. I would say unless he's hurt or sort of needs a rest, he'll be playing every game that he can. And I think he'll be a really good signing because ultimately what sort of blew the title for Dortmund last season was sort of an inability to snuff out dumb mistakes at the back and sort of bring a little consistency in the second half of the season, especially when they were sort of giving up points pretty cheaply at times. I mean, there were definitely some games against opposition that they had no business drawing with or losing to, that they just couldn't keep things tight enough at a time when they really needed to. And some of that, I think, came down to maturity. Some of it came down to injuries. They had injuries to, guys like Manuel Kanji at a pretty inopportune time, who was one of their better, central defenders. I think as long as Hummels stays healthy and, plays as well as we've known him to play for the last, 10 or 12 years, he's going to be a huge signing. And I think Dortmund are going to win the league.
Do you think, okay, that's interesting. So do you think this will be their season?
Yeah, I do.
And how much of that is influenced by some of their other signings? Because like Hummels alone, I feel like, as you've noted, like would be a big deal. But then they've also brought in Torgan Hazard and Julian Brandt would be the two that I think are probably the biggest ones. Locking down Paco Alcácer as well on a permanent deal. Of those maybe four deals, which one do you think has the biggest impact for Dortmund? Hummels, Hazard, Brandt, or Alcácer?
That's pretty tricky. I think it's hard to say in the case of Alcácer because he's already been there for the better part of the season, and you can't really treat him like a sort of revelation of a player.
All right, let's get rid of him. Let's go with the other three.
No. I mean, I'll go with Hummels. I mean, if you wanted to throw in another wild card to that, I think Nico Schultz as as a wing back is going to be a pretty big deal for them as well because they had some difficulties at times last season with that position. I mean, Hakimi was showing really well, and he's a good young player, but he was also a bit mistake prone at times. They had two aging guys, Marcel Schmelzer, who plays very little role anymore, and then Łukasz Piszczek, who is still very good, but getting up in years. So I think having that further depth and a player who over the last few seasons for Gladbach and Hoffenheim has shown himself to be a really, really good player. I think Nico Schultz is going to be a big deal for them as well. I mean, I love Julian Brandt. I think he's a really, incredibly fun player, and the partnership that he had with Kai Havertz at Leverkusen was great to watch. It's just hard to get into the side at Dortmund if you're a sort of a guy who plays in the middle of midfield, because there's a lot of good players there. I mean, I would not be surprised to see him become first choice soon enough, but he's probably got to play his way in first.
And to your earlier point, it does seem like this is maybe not if not on paper, then at least sort of in my mind, when you put them all together, a stronger attacking core than maybe Bayern Munich will have, depending on their signings. Maybe that changes, but it's Hazard, Brandt, Alcázar, as we mentioned, Götze, Royce, Jadon Sancho, Thomas Delaney, Axel Witsel. Like, it does feel like they have all the components there. It then kind of relies upon Lucien Favre to get things done, and that's where I wanted to turn our attention next. Is sort of, he's a manager who I know, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, I'm familiar with him going back to Gladbach, but I can't tell you really anything definitively about him. So I wanted to ask you, what can you tell our listeners or me about his style, his approach to management?
He's a guy. I mean, I actually sort of became a Lucien Favre fan back, a good while ago, because he was the coach of Hertha Berlin, my favorite club, for about 2.5 years, and it was one of those situations where they were a sort of decent but not great club, a sort of a mid-table club before he took over. He basically got them almost into the Champions League, and then flamed out at the beginning of the season after that. His sort of what would have been his third full season. He is an incredibly sort of painstaking teacher of movements. I mean, he's famous for setting up players very precisely and sort of walking through the shape that he has built and moving people over just half a meter to get them in precisely the right place. I think he's probably grown to be a little bit less neurotic with his as the years have passed. I mean, he's been through a lot of jobs in Gladbach and in Nice and now in Dortmund, where the profile has only gotten bigger for him. The spotlight has only gotten bigger. And I think that sometimes when you're dealing with bigger teams, with bigger names, you probably have to sort of, trust that people know their job a little bit more than when you're doing that at a smaller club. I mean, he's famous for, being very, he's had some quotes at times where he's emphasized to his players where he believes that fouling and tackling in certain situations are, not what he wants to see. He wants to see a very, very positionally based defensive game, and thinks that if you're resorting to that sort of thing, that you've already lost in some ways. I mean, perhaps this also has to do with the fact that he was a sort of, great creative midfielder in Switzerland in the 70s and had his career ended by a really rough tackle, and maybe has a bit of a sore spot for players who bring out the rough stuff.
Yeah, that'll do it. Yeah, for sure.
But I guess the one thing that is a little bit tricky with him, and this came up both in the end of his Hertha and the end of his Gladbach tenure, is that when his teams go on a real skid, when they lose, say, 6-7 games in a row, or don't win for that many games, he has never proved that he can get a team out of a downward spiral that bad. I mean, luckily that hasn't happened to him very much, because for the most part his teams are very good. And I don't think that that's going to be something that comes up this season at Dortmund, barring a sort of, unholy injury crisis, because this is a very deep team. But it is a little bit tricky to know how he is going to sort of deal with the pressure of being the favorite for the title. It's not necessarily conventional wisdom yet, because I still think that a lot of people think that Bayern own the title until someone takes it from them. But the sort of pundit class and fans, I've seen various, fan surveys on magazines and podcasts and stuff in Germany. There is a growing sense that Dortmund are the favorites for the title this year. And I don't know exactly how Favre or his team is going to deal with that. I think Favre hasn't won anything. He hasn't won a title of any kind since he left Switzerland back in 2007. So I'd love to see it happen. I really like the guy. I like, the way he plays, the way he wants people to play football, but he hasn't been able to seal a deal for a really long time.
Much, much more still to come from Matt Hermann. He has lots of knowledge, and I'm recording this after we finish recording, so we now know that this is going to be a two-parter, so you're listening to part one, but we have to take a moment today to talk about some of our sponsors, and to do that, we have to talk to Daryl Grove. I should say we get to talk to Daryl Grove. Hello, Daryl.
Damn straight. Yeah, you get to talk to me. Hello. How are you doing?
I don't like the shoe being on the other foot where you get to sort of be island, Daryl, even though you're in Boston, which is not exactly the most relaxing island resort.
I'm more like boutique hotel Daryl.
There we go.
Now. I mean, a very small room, but a very nicely decorated room, which is the core of boutique hotels, right?
Now, are you... Yes. Are you
there's a sketch of a dog on the wall.
Of course. Are you in are you saying literally right now you are in a small room within the room, or are you saying that the room itself is small?
The room itself is small.
Boutique.
Yeah.
Branding
boutique.
words. Aren't they the best?
They are the best.
Boutique means small. But why are you in Boston?
The Bundesliga preview is not boutique, from what I've heard.
It is not. That is correct. So we'll talk a little bit Bundesliga in a moment, because I do have a 5-question quiz for you based on some of the stuff that we have either already talked about, I think, or are going to be talking about later on in this episode, I think. Nothing from part 2, I don't think, in here.
This is a Bundesliga quiz ambush.
Sort of. I am aware, however, that in the past maybe my quizzes were a bit ruthless. And I think I just have this idea that you, Daryl, have... Again, all that knowledge, because you are the one who'd be like, oh, remember he played those 2 games for that team in 1999? And I'm like, yes, of course. So I think, therefore, I assume you have it all, ready to go. And that's why I end up making it way too hard, and then I end up being a jerk.
Well, I'll be safe in the knowledge that whatever I get wrong, Matt Hermann will get right.
That is definitely correct. So we'll get to that in a minute. We'll get to today's sponsors in a second. But first, I wanted to hear about, or maybe let the listeners know why you're in Boston.
Oh, yeah. So we mentioned this on Tuesday's Premier League Questions show, but I'm in Boston for the initial consult on a clinical trial that targets the very specific genetic mutation that I have with some immunotherapy. And the news so far is that the initial consultation went really well, and hopefully I'm going to be doing the trial. I'm not 100% enrolled yet. There are still some tests and stuff to make sure I'm eligible. But the good optimistic news is that this looks like a really good treatment option for me. And we're not saying it's cured, everything's gone, but it's good news at the very least.
Now, while I'm recording you live and I'm going to catch you on the spot, would it be a good idea for our listeners to send emails and handwritten letters to the hospital saying that you should qualify for the trial?
I mean, we would have to fake some test results if that's what it came to. It's really about blood counts and things like that. So I don't think handwritten letters will change that.
I mean,
send me your platelets. That'd be
That's perfect. All right. And
just add them as attachments to emails, right?
Yeah, I think that's totally normal. That's a realistic thing to request. And then my other burning question is, if things go well and the tumors are shrinking or things are knocked back a little bit, do you get to say to the cancer, how do you like them apples?
I think so.
I mean, I feel like you're legally required if you're in Boston.
Yeah, I'll get a scan of the results, and I'll press them up against a window, and I'll say, "How'd you like them apples?"
I like it. I also like today's sponsor quite a bit, because if you're, say, maybe feeling a little bit anxious about some results, maybe you could use CBD to help you calm down, and that's who today's sponsor is, our friends over at Feels.
So Feels, F-E-A-L-S, is a better way to feel better. That is their tagline, and I think I like it. It's premium CBD. CBD, which will keep your head clear and help you feel your best, because CBD has been proven to greatly reduce anxiety, pain, and sleeplessness. And they sent us some samples, and we've tried the CBD, all right?
We have indeed. And I did find it helped, chill me out a little bit, we should note it is the non-THC variety, so that we don't have federal agents kicking down the door. But
it's worth pointing out this is like fully legal everywhere, right? It's at a level that cannot get you in any trouble.
That is very important to note. And the other things I would say that like my wife actually used it as more of a like not lotion, but essentially she has psoriasis, and when it gets kind of bad, we tried the CBD, and it does help. It helps like kind of like relax the pain a little bit, and then it does also help like soothe the skin, which led me to wonder, can it treat sunburn? So we tried that when we were at the beach, and the answer is yes, it can.
Really?
I looked it up today just to see if that was maybe just me like wanting it to be the case. Instead, there are documented trials or at least examples of CBD specifically helping with the redness and like irritation of sunburn.
You know how I treat sunburn? I wear sunscreen.
I did too.
And you still got got.
I still got got.
Man.
It's mostly because, like I didn't like slather my belly, so I had like a nice like red circle right on my belly. It was lovely.
I'll do that for you next time. How about that?
I appreciate that. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. But do use Feels though. You should definitely do that.
So my wife also tried Feels. We both tried it when we got it, and she said it made her feel a lot more relaxed. My wife, she's very kind of follow the rules kind of person. So she loved the idea of
100% not jumping in to answer that one for you. I was going to let you hang yourself.
Well, she's behind me. She's okay. But she said it made her have the thought, why does anybody work? So she definitely got very relaxed. Thanks to Feels.
I mean, I think that's good. I hope that's good. But yes, it helps you relax. It can help with sunburn. Apparently, all you do is basically place a few drops of Feels under your tongue. It comes in kind of a dropper, eyedropper thing, although obviously not eyedropper. And you can feel the difference within minutes. And they offer a CBD hotline, text message support if you kind of need help with your personal experience.
The other thing my wife really liked was she said basically the packaging was very nice, but the instructions were very clear and simple because she had no idea what to do with the CBD oil. But she said the instructions were just like to the point, very clear, and just made her feel confident that, okay, I know what I'm doing now. I said, she likes to follow the rules, so she followed the instructions.
So does mine, and I'm glad you mentioned that because my wife too, or the branding specifically, the packaging specifically, she was like, this is the most nicely packaged thing I think has ever been sent to us. So well done.
You can do
Feels.
a lot with Helvetica, it turns out.
You sure can. And you can do a lot with Feels. So, Daryl, if people want to check out Feels, and maybe they don't necessarily want to pay full price for it, what could they do?
If you become a Feels member via this URL, feels.com/TSS, you'll get 50% off your first order. I believe that's half, Taylor.
That's 50.
50% off your first order with free shipping. That's FEALS.com/TSS to become a Feels member and get 50% automatically taken off your first order with free shipping. What was that URL again, Tyler?
Feels.com/TSS. Thank you very much to Feels for sponsoring today's episode and helping both of our wives relax a little bit. My wife pre and post bar. Your wife, I'm assuming being in Boston, not necessarily Boston itself, but the reason you're there has been slightly stressful. So I hope it helps in that regard as well.
Yeah, well, actually, my wife also finds Boston very stressful. She used to live here and swore that she would never come back. And if we're successful with getting on this trial, we'll be coming back regularly. So there's a delicious irony to this.
And now, correct me if I'm wrong, she was part of the Winter Hill crew, and then she fled when Whitey did. Is that how that worked?
She ratted out Whitey.
Oh, that's what it was. You probably shouldn't say that on air. I feel like that is also going to get some people kicking down your door.
He can't get us now, can he?
I mean, he can't. Other people could. Who knows?
I see.
All right, Daryl. The other reason I'm excited to talk to you, obviously aside from just hearing the sweet, sweet sounds of your voice, is because I wanted to sort of quiz you on some Bundesliga trivia. I should note you have obviously not yet.
I wanted you to not do that, though. So
you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, but I wanted to add that you haven't heard this episode yet.
No.
My first question for him, just so you know where we start off, is it Bayern München or am I allowed to say Bayern Munich? I really was which one can I do? Because that's kind of what I wanted to know is and we didn't quite get to the bottom of it, I think, but I want to know, do I need to say München? Or if I say that in America, do I sound like that guy who says that? And should I just say Bayern Munich?
My question would also be, if you say München, do you have to say Bavaria instead of Bayern? It gets very confusing, right? It's half English, half German.
And this is why I moved quickly on. But I brought it back up. But so here we go, Daryl. So it's some questions about some things that have happened this summer, more or less. So the first question for you, Felix Cruz brother of Tony Cruz, plays for which promoted team that once employed Bobby Wood?
Oh, so my initial answer was going to be Bayern Munich too, but it can't be that.
It cannot.
Maybe 1860 Munich? Because he stayed in the Munich area?
But maybe if there was another team, aside from 1860 Munich, that he briefly played for.
I can't remember who he's played for. I know he played
Union
for
Berlin,
Hanover.
my friend.
Union Berlin. Okay.
Yes. All right. So you're forgiven.
It's also possible. Is it possible he never played for 1860 Munich and I got them confused
No,
with Union
I
Berlin?
think you're correct. That's where he started out. I think he had like a brief stint with Union Berlin and then off he went. Here we go. This one may be a little bit easier. Maybe, possibly. Dortmund signed 5 players this summer. I'm going to give you Nico Schultz from Hoffenheim, the left back, because that's a tougher one. I'm wondering, of the 4 remaining, how many can you name? And I can give you a hint for each one if you'd like.
Are some of them loans converted to permanent, or are these all fresh signings?
One of them is loan converted to permanent.
Is Paco Alcácer one of them?
That is correct.
Okay. So I need like 3 more.
One is a former player of theirs who returned.
Oh, Mats Hummels is back.
There we are.
Thank you,
One
Peter.
is the brother of a player who moved to Real Madrid this summer.
Torgan Hazard.
You got it. And the last one is a member of the TSS scouting network, or at least is a scouted player in the scouting network, young German who is not Kai Havertz.
Young German who is not Kai Havertz.
But maybe played for the same team.
What's his name? So he played for Leverkusen, and his name is he's got blonde hair, but his name is escaping me. He plays he went to the World Cup instead of Leroy Sané.
He has the same first name as an American who I think is still young, who plays in Germany, a German American. That didn't help at all.
I don't know who is
Julian Brandt.
Oh,
yeah, that's a tougher one. All right, now
wasn't. I should have got that. I kind of knew it, but didn't know it. If that makes sense.
Well, you still get. I'm going to give you 3 points so far. So you're 3.
If it helps, I gave 19 vials of blood in blood tests today. That's my excuse. That's not a joke. The nurse was laughing as she was doing it. She said, "This is like doing 6 patients at once." So there's my excuse for any wrong answers today.
Real convenient that you bring that up now and not before, Daryl. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I didn't think I'd need the excuse before we started.
All right, what about this one? Who is the new manager of RB Leipzig?
Oh, is it Julian Nagelsmann?
It is Julian Nagelsmann. All right.
Hey.
You're 4 for 7 now, I think is the number.
And I'm 1 for 2 with Julians.
Okay. Now here we go. I am convinced that there used to be an American who played at Paderborn. Kyrie Shelton is there now. My question for you is, did an American once play at Paderborn?
Yes.
Do you remember who?
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay, neither do I. And now, here's your final question. Is it possible that I am thinking of Alexi Lalas playing for Padova?
I mean, anything's possible.
I feel like that's what it might be.
Anything's possible within your brain.
All right, so I'm going to stick with that, although I do think there is a U.S. connection to Paderborn beside Kyrie Shelton. But until we find out, Daryl, I'm going to give you full points for all those.
It could have been like Joe Zhao went on loan there or something.
So I was convinced it was one of those like 94, 98 squad guys. I literally went through like the Paderborn squads for the last 30 years and did not see anybody. But I feel like there's also sometimes like David Wagner gets a German flag next to his name, even though he played for the US. So there's that wrinkle in there that I'm missing.
That is a window into the level of research that Total Soccer Show is willing to do. The fact that you went through 30 years of Paderborn squads.
Or just my own neuroses and weirdness. One or the other.
Yeah, I mean, those aren't even 2 different things.
Potato, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, Daryl, I'm going to give you full credit. Why not? You got 100% on the quiz.
Hey!
Yeah.
All right. It's been a good day so far.
I mean, I think the 18 vials of blood really, really forgives you for things like Union Berlin.
19.
Oh, now it's 19. Next it's going to be 20. And then before we get back to Matt Hermann, we should probably talk about today's sponsor. Should we do that?
Yes.
All right.
Oh, it's one of my favorites. I was so happy when they sponsored us. It's Fubo TV, which we now both use to watch all the soccer and other TV as well. Fubo TV is sponsoring the Total Soccer Show, and I'm very happy about it.
They absolutely are, and I absolutely am as well. We have not talked since the Premier League. It was super nice to wake up Saturday morning and just like like open the Fubo app and have all of the possible games in front of me, and I could kind of scroll through. I didn't have to like log in or get kicked out and re-log in. I didn't have to remember passwords or like wait for sort of like the 30-second loading commercial that sometimes repeats because of reasons. Instead,
I don't even know what Geico's latest offer is.
I know, it's really upsetting, right? You don't even know. You don't even know what's going to be happening, or like what car company is going to constantly sponsor the same episode. Instead with Fubo.
But you're right, you just open Fubo.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you watch it. Do you watch it on your Apple TV or do you watch it somewhere else?
I watch it on my Apple TV, Daryl.
You watch it on your Apple TV? Well, I watch it on my laptop or my iPad or my phone. And you just go to...
All right, Minority Report. Calm down with your technology.
I'm just saying there are lots of ways to access Fubo, but once you've accessed it, you're in once and then everything is there. All the soccer channels are there. Your eyes will be bewildered by the number of soccer games you can watch.
Wait a minute. You're telling me that there's like Fox Sports 1, Fox Sports 2?
Yes,
there's
which
NBC
actually
Sports.
is very germane to our German Bundesliga conversation, right? Because that's where the Bundesliga will be broadcast this year is Fox Sports 1, Fox Sports 2. So to catch those games, you can catch them via Fubo on those channels.
And then obviously you've got NBC Sports, so you can get the Premier League. And then I really enjoy having beIN Sports back because we don't have it in the office because of, I guess, their feud with Comcast, but you've got it on Fubo. Yeah. And so you can watch any of the many things that are on beIN, and they have between 1 and 700 beIN Sports channels, it seems. So lots of different content from around the world to watch.
Actually, that's one of the big things with Fubo. It's not, you don't just get beIN Sports. You seem to get all the beIN Sports channels, which really are. There's like I don't know if there's an Ocho, but I think it goes that high. So you can watch. I'm pretty confident that like Ligue 1 is on there, and like some Turkish games are on there. There is all kinds to watch once you have the Fubo app, and then there's all the Spanish language channels as well, which opens up a whole new world.
Yeah, I mean,
I can watch the Premier League in English on NBC Sports or in Español on Universo or Telemundo.
And I'm glad you brought this up because I've got like advice here. It's pretentious advice, but I'm going to give it anyway. There's like a life hack of like I forget, it was like a long time ago, about like 20 ways to make it seem as though you've got your life together. Like if you've got like people coming to visit you, it's like tips to make your house look like super professional and like put together. Like the one that I remember.
Would you share those with me afterwards?
Sure. But like the one that I remember is like buy like 3 or 4 big bottles of Pellegrino. So when you open the fridge, you have like Pellegrino there, and it's like, ooh, okay. And I'm going to add, the Fubo app is great for this because I do think soccer is like the perfect thing to have on in the background. Like music is great. I always put on music as well. But like if you got people coming over, it's kind of an informal thing. Just having any game on, I think, is an easy thing to sort of gravitate towards, but you can sort of look away. You're not sort of just focused on like individual moments necessarily. But you could also, like, as you said, like do it in Spanish language and suddenly you seem cultured. Or you're watching like the Turkish league on beIN and someone's like, ooh, wait, hold on. Okay, this person's exotic.
So I didn't do this deliberately. I actually have the Fubo webpage open on my laptop right now because I was watching a bit of the European Super Cup before you called me.
Yeah.
Right now, live is Liverpool-Chelsea in the UEFA Super Cup. Pulisic got an assist, by the way. Maybe we'll talk about that later in the week when we have more time to see what's happened. But also, Copa do Brazil, Cruzeiro against Internacional is also live right now. So you could look really cultured. Didn't you have a neighbor who is big into Brazilian football, right? You could impress Eli by just putting some Cruzeiro on when he comes around.
Sao Paulo.
He's a Sao Paulo fan?
He has but he speaks fluent and like Brazilian accented, I think Sao Pauloan accented Portuguese. So he has the moments, I forgive him for it, but he has the moments where he's like, Neymar? And I'm like, oh, Neymar? Cool, yeah.
Ronaldinho.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you just say bless you when he says that. Just say bless you.
I'm aware that we're still in the middle of a Fubo ad read, but first of all, yes, you should. Second of all, do you remember when we were in Orlando and our driver? This is the weirdest moment. Like our Lyft driver. Like, I think Alexis Guerreros of the Cooligans was riding in the front seat. He asked him where he was from. He's like, oh, Brazil. And I was like, oh, I'm really curious. Like, is it true that you, like, drop the R and you say H? Or, like, it's like Ronaldo becomes, like, Ronaldo? And he was like, no, it's, like, Ronaldo. And he, like, rolled his R. And then Alexis started speaking to him in Spanish. And he's like, oh, yeah, I'm Colombian. And it was the weirdest, like, you had to fake being Brazilian for a moment? What's that about, man? What's that about? It's okay to be a thing. You don't got to lie.
Maybe the Colombian national team were doing badly at that point. Maybe I don't know, because he was the middle of the Copa America, right, or just after the Copa America.
It was. Maybe they share. Do they share a border? I think they do. Maybe he was born on the border between the two, and so technically he's both.
There we go. He's Brazilian.
Perfect. I think we've nailed it. But I think we've also nailed this sponsor because Fubo genuinely makes my life easier, at least in terms of having the games right there, not having to log in. And then, as you've said earlier, you have them on your devices. I can watch it on my phone when I'm driving. Obviously, that's the best way to do it. I can watch it on my iPad in the shower. That's the best place to do that.
Don't take your iPad in the shower.
You respond to that and don't drive and watch TV at the same time?
Yeah, because none of those are company property. The iPad is TSS company property.
I appreciate your concern, and I appreciate Fubo's sponsor. Daryl, if people want to check out Fubo and maybe not pay full price once again, how can they do that?
If you get the family plan, you go to FuboTV.com/TSS, FuboTV.com/TSS, get the family plan, which comes with all kinds of channels, and you will get 10% off your first 2 months. 10% off your first 2 months via FuboTV.com/TSS. And I will add, Taylor, also, any good ad read includes a list of all the features and benefits of a product. That's one of the secrets to ad reads. We haven't mentioned the DVR yet. The DVR is the biggest DVR I've ever had.
It's really exciting because it's the first DVR I've had since we cut the cord. 4 years ago, thereabouts. And
500 hours do we get or something crazy like that?
But I'm glad you reminded me of this because, again, another way it makes my life easier is if you cut the cord and you don't have live replays of the game you might need to watch, you're basically relying on either finding a dodgy stream that will replay it for you or finding highlights. But this way, if I know I'm not going to be around, I have access to a DVR again, and then now I can sort of DVR those games, watch them at my leisure, or if they were broadcast within 3 days, you can go back and watch them that way on demand. So
that to me, that's the best part. The DVR is amazing, but you have to remember to DVR it, which that sometimes we get a little forgetful, and then we actually desperately need to see a game for TSS. If it was broadcast within the last 72 hours, you can just go back in the calendar and rewatch it, which is amazing. That's how I rewatched. It is like time travel. That's how I rewatched Manchester United Chelsea. A couple of times when we did our Premier League questions review of that game. I just opened up Fubo, selected that game, and scrolled to the time I wanted to watch. Didn't have to watch any weird ads for car insurance, and I was away. Yeah, so the 72-hour replay thing is absolutely incredible.
There we are. So we appreciate Fubo for what they've done for our lives to make it easier and to allow us to stream things when we probably shouldn't be streaming things, and for sponsoring today's episode. So once again, that was Fubo.tv/TSS for 10%.
It is not. It's FuboTV.com/TSS.
Oh.
FuboTV.com/TSS. And I think because you got it wrong now, you definitely have to put the link in the show notes so no one can be confused.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Well, then I apologize to Fubo for getting that wrong. Daryl, thank you for correcting that. Daryl, thank you for joining me to do these ad reads and to do the little Bundesliga quiz. But now your time is done, and I'm going to throw it back to me talking to Matt Hermann.
I've been kicked off the Total Soccer Show.
That is great.
But I'll be back in town tomorrow, Taylor, Thursday, and we'll be back in studio together on Friday, hopefully, right?
Hopefully. All
right. So... sorry, I feel like I should be closing this out, but I shouldn't. I should let you do it.
No, you can do it. I already did it once, but then you kept it going, so you go ahead this time.
Here's Taylor talking to Matt Hermann about the Bundesliga.
Do you think then that Dortmund are, with the depth they have, set at the moment? Do you think they'll maybe try to sign somebody else, or will they go with what they've got right now?
I think that they're pretty set. Okay. I think that I would be surprised if they went for another big buy of any kind. I mean, I see very good depth just about everywhere on the pitch.
So it seems
maybe a forward. I don't know.
Okay.
But Favre is somebody who also is very suspicious of pure strikers. I mean, there was a time when he inherited Luke de Jong, a pure striker at Borussia Mönchengladbach, and he basically decided he didn't rate him and just pushed him out of the club.
Ah.
Despite the fact that the club had spent 12 million euros on him, he just, he likes a guy who sort of flits around between the lines, but, pure strikers, he basically doesn't have a lot of time for.
All right. Well, Bobby Wood is available if he needs a not very well performing Bundesliga striker. Bobby Wood is available, I believe. At least I think he is. I don't think he's moved yet, but I doubt he's maybe the caliber that Dortmund will be looking for. If we'll move away from Bobby Wood, I'll ask you this: if it's not Dortmund or Bayern Munich, who is the other or others teams that could be challenging for the title, or at least in that kind of race for the top four?
Oh, I reckon probably pretty similar teams as we saw up in those places last season. I mean, Leipzig is another team who have really, really good depth in their squad. They probably don't have as much pure quality as Dortmund or Bayern, partly because their squad skews a bit younger and some of their guys have just not been on the big stage for as long. But they do have great depth all over the field. I think both Leverkusen and Gladbach probably have enough quality to make life a little bit difficult for those top two teams. I mean, Gladbach have a question mark over them in that Marco Rose, the new coach that they have, who came in from Red Bull Salzburg, is really trying to install a very, very different system than his predecessor. So that could take a little while. But then again, you could say the same thing about Leipzig because, Julian Nagelsmann is sort of the toast of Germany when it comes to young coaches, and everybody, he was probably the hottest property on the market over the last couple of years. But the way he wants football to be played is pretty different from the way the Red Bull school of football. He's much more possession oriented. I mean, he'll tell you that his sort of heroes of coaching are guys like, Thomas Tuchel and Pep Guardiola, who put a lot of emphasis on possession. And, Red Bull football is all about, pressure and, fast transitions and, playing off the ball. So I think that could be a pretty, tricky transition for him.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that as well, because his style of play, like at Hoffenheim last season, he finished up there, then he moved to RB Leipzig this summer. But with Hoffenheim last year, it sounds like they were sort of known for giving away leads and maybe not being the most secure team at the back. Is that sort of like a problem with Nagelsmann's system, or was that more so a problem with Hoffenheim's depth that maybe a bit more money, a bit more talent at RB Leipzig will help to disguise?
I think there's some of both. I mean, I think that Hoffenheim were really good at their form of attacking was pretty committed, and they were committed to making overloads in the forward third of the pitch, which can leave you exposed. I mean, luckily for Leipzig, their defenders are really, really good. I mean, guys like Konate and Upamecano are spectacular and young and fast, and they can sort of paper over a lot of those problems. I personally think it also just had something to do with the fact that Hoffenheim's, shot conversion rate was just crazy low. I mean, so far under their expected goals, expected points. I mean, I think if they had converted at a normal rate, quote unquote, they probably would have finished, I don't know, third, fourth, fifth in the table instead of, I think, ninth is where they finished. I mean, they were just so bad at finishing. And I think I can't even necessarily blame the personnel. I think it was just one of those weird, luck things in some ways. But I feel like things could get a lot better at Leipzig.
If they do, I'm hoping that it will also involve Tyler Adams. How do you think he fits into Nagelsmann's plans for Leipzig this season? And who maybe do you think is going to be challenging him for playing time? If he's a defender or a central midfielder or a wide midfielder or wherever he ends up, who do you think? Where do you think he ends up, and who do you think challenges him?
Well, I mean, as far as I can tell, Leipzig sees him as a midfielder rather than a defender. Hello, Berhalter. And I don't see any of that changing. I mean, I feel like there's no reason to think that Julian Nagelsmann is going to see that anything particularly differently than his predecessor did. I mean, I feel like by the last, say, I don't know, 10 games of the season, it was pretty well accepted that Tyler Adams was, if not a sort of first choice player in the midfield, he was somebody who was sort of in the mix. I mean, Ralf Rangnick, the coach last year at Leipzig, was sort of pretty insistent on rotating that team. He didn't necessarily give a lot of players sort of the sense that they were always going to be first choice, and there was sort of a pretty strong sense that he wanted to spread things around and cultivate depth in the squad. I mean, I think that actually will work really, really well coming this year because Rangnick knew that he was only going to be coach for 1 year while they waited on Nagelsmann, and he sort of remains part of the club as a, I don't know whether he's officially called a sporting director or a director of football or something. So he was clearly sort of laying some groundwork there, and I think that squad rotation was part of that. As far as Adams' competition in midfield, I mean, I guess guys like Stefan Ilsanker, Diego Demme, maybe to a lesser extent guys like Kevin Campbell or Marcel Sabitzer, who probably will get forward a bit more than Tyler Adams would. I expect him to sort of reclaim that status after a little while. I mean, it's a bummer that he is hurt, and his injury seems to be dragging on a little longer than people expected. I mean, I remember reading maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago when he got this groin issue sort of looked at for the first time by the Leipzig doctors. They were like, well, maybe he'll be back for the beginning of August for our friendly against Villa. And that date just keeps getting pushed back. And, it sucks when you have a new coach and you can't show him exactly what your skill set is. I mean, Nagelsmann has watched Tyler Adams. He's he's played against him. I'm not sure for absolute sure if he's played against him in terms of when at Adams' arrival last season vis-a-vis, when they played against Hoffenheim. But I'm pretty sure he knows something about him as a player. But, that he can't show them that day-to-day is really, really too bad.
All right. Well, hopefully, as the season goes on, Tyler Adams finds his way in, and all is right with the world. But it also then is a weird thing, for American fans, because you want to support Americans, so you're going to cheer for Tyler Adams. But I am assuming that RB Leipzig is still one of, if not the least popular, most detested teams in the Bundesliga. Is that still the case, or is that position softening at all?
No, not really at all. And it's weird because you also get periodic re-injections of RB Leipzig hate. This particular one I'm about to sort of get to has to do with the newly promoted side, Union Berlin, who are a club that sort of really prides itself on being a community-based club, a club that sort of has very strong ties, and having taken a very anti-commercial stance. And they are playing at home to Leipzig in their very first home game in the top flight. And their fans are going to celebrate that fact by being silent for the first 15 minutes because it's such an affront to them that they have to play against RB Leipzig, which, I don't think is necessarily a good idea, but, it shows that there is enough, real contempt among certain groups of fans in the Bundesliga that they don't even want to deal with this club if they can help it.
And is it like for people who are new to it, it's essentially that Red Bull wanted a team in Germany, change the name of another team, make them RB, which is what, like lawn ball sport or something like that? I forget.
Yeah.
But is there one specific thing, because as money becomes more prevalent in the game, or has been prevalent but continues to be more prevalent, it does feel like you're getting like new groups buying ownership interest, or at least a percentage ownership share of different Bundesliga clubs. And so it feels like the influx of money almost makes what Leipzig did more understandable. But at the same time, I'm assuming then, is it more about like changing the name, changing the entire culture, or is it really just the kind of money a company owning a team that makes them that unpopular?
It's something to do with the money, but it is more to do with the sort of undermining of what Germany sees as its sort of attempts to protect football as a cultural artifact or whatever. I mean, football clubs like all clubs of any kind in Germany have to be actually run by the members, at least in some sort of pro forma sense. I mean, they have to sort of have, annual general meetings where people are elected, and there are, points of order on the agenda that have to be decided. And a lot of this stuff at your bigger clubs with a lot more members, who, of course, not every member shows up for the annual general meeting or anything like that. There is a bit of sort of going through the motions, but it's an important set of motions for a lot of German football fans. And the fact that Leipzig has just found a way to completely circumvent that. I mean, they basically just made it so that instead of having a membership which you can buy for, $50 a year, which is kind of a normal football club membership, their membership is many thousands of euros. And they're, the membership of RB Leipzig is only like 15 people. And it's basically, they've just sort of managed to tick the boxes to make them, conform to the rules in the most sort of craven way. And the fact that it's, as you said, this was just a soft drink company that was looking for another opportunity to get its brand out there, just like it does with motorsport or weird airplane races through inflatable gates. There's a lot. People think football is a bit, holy in that respect, and they see this as sort of cheapening that.
Well, then let me ask you this. You're a Hertha fan, as you said. This summer, Lars Windhorst, I think, bought 38% of Hertha for 125 million euros. Is that perceived as a good thing because there's more money coming in? Because I kind of assume that it's looked down upon for the reasons you mentioned, that it's money coming in, ownership being lost, maybe fans being cut out. Or for a club like Hertha, is it, there's more money we might be able to spend and be a bit more competitive?
Well, if you ask, I don't know, 10 Hertha fans, I think you'll probably get, 10 different answers in terms of how warmly they view this. I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic about it. I mean, Lars Windhorst seems like kind of a shady guy. I mean, he's been involved in some, I don't know, not exactly above board investments, and he's, declared bankruptcy before. And
yeah, I feel like to jump in for a minute, anytime anybody is described as an investor, I get a little nervous. I get a little sweaty. I'm like, I don't know about that. That seems like a very general category. When it's owner of a gigantic company is putting some money into it, it's all right, well, I know where that's coming from. That makes sense. When it's investor, I'm what do you, is it Chia Pets? Is that where you made your money and now suddenly you have a little bit to spend? It always makes me slightly nervous.
Exactly. I mean, you can do Chia Pets or Planet Hollywood. I
don't know why I went with Chia Pets, but I did. Hollywood. That's a way better one.
Yeah, but these things can all go belly up. I think. I mean, I've actually been surprised that there haven't been more investors who are willing to sort of dip their toe into this set of waters. I mean, it is tricky both from a sort of PR aspect, as we know, guys like, Dietmar Hopp, who invested in TSG Hoffenheim, has also been under fire at various times. He was sort of the whipping boy of the league before Leipzig took over. But there's certainly money to be made in the Bundesliga. I mean, I think that there's a reason why people invest in football, and it's not just for, it's ability to raise somebody's profile, but around the fringes and things like, marketing partnerships and, concession sales rights. I mean, people can make money. And if they sort of do those things intelligently, I'm sure that there are some investors who look at it as a good idea. I mean, when it comes to Hertha, it's a little bit tricky because there's a lot of clubs that have sort of quote unquote strategic partners. I mean, Bayern have, Audi and Deutsche Telekom and Adidas. I think Puma is an investor in Dortmund along with an energy company called Evonik, their shirt sponsor. Just like Gazprom with Schalke actually owns part of the club. And the weird thing with Hertha is that it's not a company. It's not a sort of a portfolio of companies all investing, 12.5 or 15%. It's one guy putting a bunch of money in, and eventually, if things go well, he said that he wants to put 49.9% controlling rights into the club, which that I think once again is sort of a way that you can get around Germany's 50+1 rule, which mandates that the membership has to have a controlling interest in the club. Mm-hmm. But there's been situations in the very recent past with a guy called Martin Kind in Hanover. There's also a guy called his name is Kühne, whose first name escapes me at the moment, at Hamburg. And these are guys who have put a ton of money into the club, and Kind tried to take over the club and try to break the 50+1 rule. And a lot of times the sentiment among fans has flipped on these guys, partly because they are perceived as pulling the strings in the background. And, when your club's doing well, that can be good. But when your club isn't doing well, as things have been lately for both Hanover and Hamburg, you can become a real, villain to the club. And it can just turn out to be a bad situation for everyone. So for Hertha's sake, I hope that they win because I love them. But I really hope that they win so that this whole, Windhorst thing doesn't turn into a disaster.
That makes sense to me. And it also is so, it would be so disconcerting to me if somebody was like, oh, I just want 49.9% ownership interest in your club. Oh, and my best friend, who always does everything I tell him to, also wants 2%. That feels like a very 49.9 is about as close as you can get, and I feel like a crafty businessman will find a way to make something happen so that they end up with a controlling interest in the team.
Well, but in Germany you can only sell for up to 49.9% interest in a club because the membership has to retain, control over its affairs. But nonetheless, when you don't have to be a majority interest in a company or a club to exert the biggest influence. You can be a plurality interest and still be the most powerful faction for sure.
All right. Well, let's move to maybe happier areas. I'm not sure. You're a Hertha fan. Union back in the Bundesliga. I don't even know if they've been there before, to be honest.
They never have.
There we are. First off, what made you go with Hertha over Union in the first place as a fan?
Oh, I got into Hertha originally sort of at a distance, partly because I sort of had a soft spot for the city of Berlin, which I visited, many years ago, back in the 90s. My first time I went to Europe, I visited Berlin. I liked it. And then a few years after that, my sort of home team, DC United, sold Tony Sane to Hertha Berlin, and I sort of followed Hertha Berlin in order to follow him for a few years after that. I love
Tony Sane. That's a good shout right there.
Good dude. So when I finally got to Germany, I happened to be in Berlin for the first several months that I was there, and so the first, 5 or 6 Bundesliga games that I went to were all Hertha games. I think I went to 3 or 4 home games and a couple of away games that weren't that far away, like Hamburg and Wolfsburg. And I was just hooked. I really liked it. At the time, Union were not having a very easy time of it. This is a club that sort of, its natural space over the last, 20 years, or at least since German reunification, has been bouncing between the second and third tier of German football. So I think they were in the third tier, which at the time was a regional league, which really felt very small time at the time. So I wanted to go to a Bundesliga game. I didn't want to go to a, Regionalliga Nord game. So, it was out of the question. I was going to be into Union at the time.
And were they? I know Hertha was like a team that was in Berlin, but competed with with West Germany. Where were Union? Were Union also in the West German league, or were they in East Germany?
They were in the DDR Oberliga, the German Democratic Republic, league, and they were not always in the first division of that football league system. For the most part, a lot of the big power clubs in the sort of East German times were, Dynamo Dresden, Dynamo Berlin, and, even clubs like, Chemnitzer FC and Hallischer FC and, a number of other clubs which have sort of sunk way down into the lower reaches of the, German league system in reunified times. Were much bigger clubs. Union was kind of like, if you wanted to put it in a sort of anachronistic way, they were a bit of a hipster club in East German times. It was a club that you supported in order to make a bit of a statement about yourself.
I see.
Both in terms of what part of the city you were from. They were sort of part of the sort of southeastern part of the city, and it was a Köpenicker club, and they wanted to sort of give the impression that was what they represented. And also, you supported Union if you were sort of anti-government in a sort of somewhat socially acceptable way, like Dynamo Berlin was a club that was associated with Stasi, with the secret police. And
isn't that the thing with like all Dynamos have a connection to the KGB, which I'm assuming is why the Dynamos were quite so dominant in that era?
You don't say. You don't say.
I know it's weird. Yeah. It's a weird connection that you totally understand and makes sense, and is kind of terrifying all at once.
Yeah. It's totalitarianism has its tentacles absolutely everywhere. It is total, including total soccer.
There we go. Keeping it on brand. I appreciate it, Matt.
Exactly. The brand was right in front of me.
Although I think you just equated us with totalitarianism. So I don't know if I love it so much, but I'll take it. We're fine.
Low blow.
Whatever. It's fine. The Stasi, I'm not even going to say that. No, the Stasi are terrible. But like, so Union have this kind of like counterculture, hipster sort of vibe to them. They did feel a little bit in reading about them, not quite as like punk rock as FC St. Pauli, but in that level of like the hipster counterculture approach. And I think that extends to their stadium from what I read, which is built in, I think, the 1920s. It's been their home ground for forever. And it does sound like it's a pretty strong atmosphere, will give them at least a little bit of home field advantage for the first time in the Bundesliga. Yeah.
I actually have, truthfully, a lot of the friends that I have in Berlin are Union supporters rather than Hertha supporters. Even in Berlin, Hertha sort of, at least a certain type of person, whether it's for reasons of personal history or just like when you got to Germany, Unions are a lot more popular among certain people, and it's really fun at their games. Hertha have a sort of architecturally grand stadium in the Olympic Stadium, but it's a terrible stadium for football. It has a big running track around it, and you're really far from the action. Whereas Union have managed to build a great ground. They sort of, it's been there for a long time, but they've sort of renovated it and they've rebuilt parts, and they have an awesome atmosphere. It's really cheap to go there. Aside from about 5 sections, which are not that big, it's all standing, the entire stadium. They have a really, really boisterous fan culture, not even just in the end that's sort of the fan block, but just about all the way around the ground. I think that if nothing else, having Union in the Bundesliga just for atmosphere reasons is going to be awesome, because I don't think that what's going to be on the pitch is going to be all that entertaining.
Well, yeah, so that leads me to the obvious question there of like the 3 promoted sides, Union, Paderborn, FC Köln. Who do you think is most likely to stay up? Is it at best one of the teams, or there's a chance all 3 could potentially do it? Although it sounds like Paderborn have very limited chances.
I think by far Cologne have the best chances to stay up. If for no other reason than a lot of second division clubs, when they get to the Bundesliga, have difficulty scoring goals, and a lot of times they'll have strikers who have really sort of proven their worth in the second division, and then they get to the first division and they hit a brick wall. And Cologne happens to have a couple of guys who are sort of their, I guess maybe first and second choice, or second and third choice, depending on how you want to look at it, or first and third, in Anthony Modeste and John Cordoba, who have scored a lot of goals in the top flight in past years. I also just think that Cologne, the sort of entire top to bottom club infrastructure is a lot more solid. It's a club that is certainly a bit volatile. They've gone up and down a fair bit in the last 15, 20 years. But you look at the way that the sort of professionalism of the club and the number of employees that they have, and the sort of youth setup that they have, it's a natural first division club. They should be in the first division every year. So I feel like as long as they don't have another bout of, messing things up for bad reasons, they should stay up in the first division. Paderborn and Union, I think their chances are super slim. I think Paderborn, just because their finances are incredibly weak, they have, a tiny stadium. They have very little in the way of resources to buy players. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they haven't bought a single player all summer. They've gotten some free transfers in, but they haven't spent any money at all, and they've sold a few of the guys who helped get them up in the first division. Union, I think infrastructure-wise, they're sort of getting towards being a natural first division club, but I'm not sure that they just have the quality in their squad. And I think that they are a team that's really putting a lot of emphasis on defending, which is what got them into the first division. I mean, I think they only gave up something like, 27 goals all season, which, in a 34 game season is pretty damn good. And they're just going to basically defend the hell out of every game and hope that they can hold on, which really worked for them last year. I mean, they were only beaten 5 times, and I think they drew something like 15 times. It was a team that was really, really hard to beat, and really, I don't know. I didn't watch them. I went to see them live a couple of times last season, or I guess now it was the season before it. I missed the whole of last season. I can't believe I've been in the States as long as I have.
I can't believe that you forgot about Rifet Kapic, who Paderborn signed for $114,000. Just kidding. That's kind of crazy, but I think definitely illustrates your point.
Yeah. Union's just they're gonna sort of hold on for dear life, and I don't think that's gonna be enough.
So that concludes part 1 of our Bundesliga preview. As I said in the very beginning of today's episode, part 2 will be out tomorrow. Again, that one more focused on Americans in the Bundesliga, as well as some of the other bigger clubs to middle tier clubs, with some other topics in there too. So check back for that tomorrow. But until then, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to today's episode of the Total Soccer Show. I will talk to you tomorrow.
Slice it.